So I'm recording now, but I don't know how we should go about doing it. I honestly don't know how to do this because I've never done this before. But other than I kind of wanted it to be.
I trusted you.
I just wanted a nice, chill discussion. Hello, everyone. I am Ruffalek, and I'm joined here today by Serious Seth, good friend of mine.
Hi. Good friend. What are you talking about?
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
We're here to talk about No Game, No Life, the anime.
I thought it was real life.
I mean, it is. It's totally real. But no, it definitely. I don't think either of us have read the books at all. I started to, but I haven't gotten through a single one yet.
I don't have time.
I don't know. I've been looking through the wiki here, and it doesn't look like anyone's been updating the wiki for quite some time. The latest info I can find on here is 2016. They even for the movie section on here, it says there is a movie in the works. No details have been released yet. And I'm just sitting here going, the movie's out on like DVD in a month or so. So the big thing that I wanted to do with these series, though, is that I kind of had the idea of going in with one person knowing the anime before we go in, and one person that has never seen it before, and kind of getting a different perspective from each person because of this. Just having someone that's knows it well and one person that has a little bit more of a reactionary response to it. And so I've seen this anime way too many times. I need to stop. I need to stop. It's my second favorite anime of all time. And you've never actually seen it before until I shoved it in your face and said, watch it.
It was all right, I guess.
Well, I guess that answered that question, but
all right, episode done.
Okay, yeah, roll credits. No, so
Hold two names on the credits.
Yes, the two names on the credits. It's just gonna be my name over and over and over again for all the different things, and then
just guest star to Seth.
Yeah, and then have like a 50-person long special thanks.
To my cat, my other cat, that one bug that fell on my keyboard while doing it.
Yes. So, I just realized too, the background for this website is the movie poster. And they have no
details.
On them.
No details have been released.
No details. Oh my goodness. But anyway, so what did you have to think about the show before you actually started getting into it? Before we actually watched the whole thing, did you have any thoughts going in?
Me think? No, not really. I don't know. Typically, when I want to watch a new series, I don't want to have a preconceived notion of what it's going to be about, because otherwise, I find like it's going to skew whether or not I actually want to watch it.
Yeah,
whether or not I'm actually going to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at things and trying to avoid as much as you can and go in as blind as possible. That's a good way to do it. I think that's something I don't practice myself, but
yeah, because like I find I can enjoy a lot of really crappy, quote unquote crappy animes, just because I don't really look into the anime and I just sit there and enjoy the rides.
Yeah, that's definitely a great way of doing it. No, for me, I just don't really have a lot of patience to sit through tons of different anime and actually go through it, even though I'm a person who watches One Piece. So I haven't watched that thing in like a year and a half or 2 years. I'm so far behind.
I guess you have like 800 episodes to catch up on.
I think I have 250 now, something like that. It's pretty bad. Let's just start with like, how did you feel overall about the show? And just you said that you thought it was all right, but like more specifically, like how did you feel on all the major? Let's go by elements and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about the characters first. What did you think of the main cast of this show?
So I mean, you have like a lot of classic tropes. You have the genius kid, you have the bumbling idiot, and you have the person that kind of glues everyone together.
Yeah, that's true.
So personally with me, I don't really like the genius trope too much. I I think it's really crappy writing having somebody who's just inherently a genius. It just makes it way too convenient for everything. But I think this anime did it really well. They played that card really well. Just because, like, I don't know, typically I find whenever you have a genius trope appearing in a show, what they seem to like to do is they show their cards too early. They all of a sudden show the plan and you can connect the dots way too freaking early. I mean, with this show, like you said, if you were paying attention and kind of knew what was going on, you could start connecting the dots to see their final master plan. But for me, since I typically don't want to do that, I want to be pleasantly surprised by the end. I think they did it really well with very carefully showing their cards.
Yeah, and it's something that makes a lot more sense too, because if you really were that smart, you know, one of the best strategies for taking you down your opponent is to never show your full hand. And on top of that, I think another great aspect of dealing with the genius character here is usually that goes into the idea of, like, if this was a shonen, then the idea is that you have the overpowered character, the one that can instantly defeat everything. And it's the same thing here, where it's you have the genius who can instantly do everything because they are just a god and they're always going to win. And that's something I find interesting, because here they come in with the statement that blank never loses. But the interesting thing about it is how they never lose, because in every single situation here, they are always at a disadvantage. Yeah. But they find ways to get around it. And the other big thing here is with the genius character, they are not like, I can do everything and I am God. I can figure out every single thing, even though I shouldn't be able to figure this out like this. No, there is some drawbacks, and they end up creating the character of Blank, which is not one character, but two characters together. And then this character is the overpowered one. Blank as a whole is the overpowered character. But because you have the actual characters of Sora and Shiro being two characters that are both good in their own rights, but both having major flaws and drawbacks. The main thing being that Shiro is, yes, a genius, but she's also very naive. She doesn't understand the world that well. She's not very active herself. She doesn't deal with strategies and human emotions and tactics and all this other stuff. She can't handle a lot of it. She's good. She acts like a computer program, as you see in episode 1, where she's facing off against Tet in the chess game. And they talk about how she can defeat all these computer programs and all this kind of stuff, and she's really good at that kind of thinking. But as soon as Tet shows that they are not a computer program and they don't play perfectly, and they use that kind of strategy of, you know, actual fake moves to try and feign an attack and cause you to lose your game plan, that's where Sora steps in and can see these kinds of tactics and help Shiro go back on the right trail and help her calculate the actual correct path. And then they work together to create this impossible being that would be impossible if it wasn't that they are two people.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of shows that do create that impossible being, and that's why I find them really boring shonens. But I mean, like, you see that throughout the entire show, which I think they also did really well, is that literally every single game, it's typically starting out where it's just the one of them, and then it swaps to the other. And you see, like, both times, each of them are losing when it's just themselves. So in order for them to win, it's suddenly the two of them playing.
Yeah, and that's...
That's why they can come up with the statement of blank never loses. Just because if it's the two of them, it's literally the impossible character that cannot lose. But if it was just like one of them, I'm pretty sure, like, if they just decided to have a game where one of the stipulations was only one of them can play and the other one cannot interfere at all, that person would lose.
Yeah, there's a really good chance of that. And I think this is the way that they can make... This is exactly how they are able to make an impossible character interesting. Because the problem with an impossible character is that they're never going to lose. But you know for a fact that Blank will never lose. That's something you're guaranteed. But because each character individually will lose on their own merits, that's where it becomes interesting, because they are losing the battles, but they're not losing the war. They will always win the war. That's something that's guaranteed. But it's interesting to see how they deal with the losses of each little battle, the little tiny battles inside the games. Because there's the first chess, not the first chess battle, the championship chess battle against shoot, I always forget her name, Kurumi. But no, but like with Kurumi there, that one they showcase it probably the most, each of them having failings in the battle. So like it starts with Shiro, like you said before, it swaps between them quite constantly, where you started with Shiro and she's trying to do this and she's playing chess like she normally does, but it quickly becomes apparent that this isn't chess, this is a tactics game. And that's when Sora comes in and starts playing it like a tactics game and stuff like that. And he gets to the point where he becomes too cocky and he acts like he himself. He acts like himself. He becomes cocky, he becomes arrogant, and he ends up pushing too much to the point where, crap, I just killed myself because I pushed too far. And that's when Shiro comes back in and helps him come back down and think more logically again. Just them playing off of each other like this. You have where someone's going to mess up, but then the other one comes in and can help with their faults and make sure that blank never fails.
Yeah.
And so you actually created this, the I'm always going to win situation, into an actually intriguing situation, because they're always at a disadvantage, and on top of that, they are not perfect alone. And that's the key thing here, I think, that makes the show actually interesting.
They actually create suspense around the impossible character instead of it just being, I win.
Yeah, instead of it just always being, I win, because and also the fact that the way that they win is always clever, and it's always out of the box. I can't think of a situation where they didn't just, like, win through something not very clever. Like, there's always something that they outsmart their opponent, because like I said, they're always at a disadvantage, all that kind of stuff. The only one I can think of is the chess game with Tet, because you don't see that. It just happens. Though sometimes that can be to the show's detriment. Like, it takes up too much of the time sometimes, like with the rock paper scissors match with Dola. that was a bit of a that probably went on a little bit too long. But it led to one of my favorite scenes in the show, where you see Sora and Shiro separated. The only time in this show I can think of.
Yeah, I feel like in the anime that was kind of a heavy-handed insert. But I'm sure if you read the light novels or whatever, it's popping up a little bit. I think in the anime you probably could have done without that separation fact. Or at least that scene. I don't know.
Yeah, because it never comes into play. It's a useless scene overall. It's a useless scene in the long run, but I honestly feel like it's a very important scene, because it establishes the need for each other. And it's kind of played on later on. It's kind of played about later on, around episode 9, where Sora disappears. And so Sora disappears, and Shiro's left all alone, and suddenly no one knows who Sora is except Shiro. Shiro's the only one that remembers Sora, and so people think that she's been manipulated to think that there was another person, but she was the only person. And eventually she finds out that in fact Sora is real, and they were playing a game to steal memories, and Sora's memory of himself had been stolen at that point. So he didn't exist anymore. But because they are blank, they still win, because Shiro is still part of blank. So I found that to be... I found that there's a little bit of play in there, but it's interesting that it doesn't affect it as much. I will have to wonder how they deal with it in the light novel, if there's a little bit more hamming it up. But I also feel like that scene where they first separate is also just for comedy, partly, too. They ham it up for the comedy.
Well, I mean, like, I don't know if they had that much separation anxiety during episode 9 or whatever it was, where they're playing that game. Shiro should have been unable to function just because Sora was technically gone.
Yeah, I kind of, yeah, I think that is a little bit of a flaw right there. But to me, I kind of justify it in the sense of that Sora was, the memory of Sora was kind of diminished and it was foggy at that point. So the extreme separation anxiety like that was dulled because of this memory conflict.
Mm-hmm.
That was my best guess for it. But yeah, no, it doesn't make sense that they are that insanely insane when they're separated. But it actually might have also had to deal with the current situation, because that was the scene where Shiro was teasing Sora a little bit with Dola.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of that, how did you think of the fan service? So this is probably one of the biggest contention about the show, is the fan service.
I don't know. I don't have problems with fan service like some people do. Inserting the fan service into a show is fine and dandy. And I mean, this, like you've talked about before, this anime it actually plays on the fan service.
Yeah, and I think that's really important if you're deciding to include fan service into a show. Is A, go all out. B, don't have a reason for it though. Like, don't just like throw it like, you know, it's fine and dandy to throw it in once in a while because it's like, oh, we got to get some popularity, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. And it's like I'm fine with just ignoring it. If it's shoved in your face all the time for no reason, then that's where it gets bad. But this show, I think, handles fan service really cleverly for the most part. I don't think it handles it perfectly, but I think it handles it really well in a lot of situations. Mainly everything but the bath scenes, almost. The bath scenes, I think, are they're just too much of flat out fan service. It's just, I get to the point where it's just why at that point, and
why it's to bring you in the opposite direction of where they go when they're in games. So it's essentially dulling the hype from a game and bring you into a sort of different mindset that once you do get dropped back into a game, you're essentially, I don't know, refreshed.
Yeah,
I don't have a better word.
It brings you down from the high. It brings you down from the high, and I can definitely see that. But at the same time, it's like you could do it through other means than just having a flat out fan service scene like that. I mean, the one thing that I will say is at least it provides a lot of good comedy, especially the last one. The last one has some really great comedy in it, in my opinion. It's that's one of the greatest things about the show, is the comedy, but we'll touch on that in a little bit. But no, I wanted to talk about the one other thing about fan service. Is you were saying that that I've mentioned before, that the fan service actually plays into the thing, and I wanted to elaborate more on that. Like, the thing about the show that I love so much is that Sora and Shiro are insane masterminds when it comes to strategy and manipulation, especially. And Sora is especially good with this. Thinking about fan service is like it's a psychological attack, is literally what it is creating these awkward or arousing moments does affect people's psyche. Like, you know, it doesn't affect everyone's, especially in this universe where there's lots of different species, but it does affect everyone to a degree. And one of the biggest things I actually really like, that is one of the biggest contentions and one of the biggest hated things about this show, I find a lot of people of it, is the incestuous undertones between Sora and Shiro. On top of that being like, you know, kind of like, okay, that's really awkward. Yeah, it is very awkward, but that's kind of the point with it. Is it's there to really put your opponent on edge. When you suddenly see this, it really like messes with people's brains. And like when, like, you know, and the fact that this causes a lot of discomfort for people watching goes to show just how effective that tactic is. Both of them have a very good trust in each other to know that this is not actually anything. and they don't actually feel that kind of relationship. They do not feel anything for each other than a really close bond as brother and sister, and a really good friendship is what they have. And of course, on top of that, they hold Blank above all else. It wasn't, no, Blank was the second memory, if I recall right. Blank was the second biggest thing that Sora holds dear.
Mm-hmm.
And then Shiro herself is what he holds dear the most. And not just Shiro, but the belief in Shiro's potential, which is another really big message about the show, is the potential to do great things. That's just so many things I love about this show, and that's another thing that I really love about it. The humanity speech is, if I ever think of like if I had to actually answer what is my favorite scene, that would probably be my favorite scene in the entire show, is the speech about humanity sucks. Flat out, humans suck. They are the worst things ever. They just can't do anything. They will never be as strong as everyone else, but because they are weak, they are strong in their own way. And the weak can always rise to beat the strong, what is perceived as the strong, at least. And it's a message I absolutely love, and it's a very inspiring one, in my opinion. I don't know, what did you think about that scene, actually? I'm curious.
I don't know, like the scene kind of irked me, actually. Just because like it's also tying into another thing that I was wanting to talk about, but I'll bring it up now, I guess, since
yeah, we might as well move into it.
It's really related, and why it's irking me is related to that topic. But the entire world is essentially categorized by the ability to use magic, and yet magic is essentially nullified by Tet's rule. Since Tet has essentially created games and gaming as the ultimate thing in the world, I just find like the ranking system to be kind of null. It doesn't matter. So it's like once people are getting themselves down and out, like, oh, we're ranked bottom. Oh my god, we're terrible and we're not going to do anything. I'm just like, well, no, it's a game, and like each species is playing off of a particular aspect of what it takes to be good at a game, sort of thing. And so that's why it's just like, I don't know. Sora was essentially stating what was the obvious, in my opinion. But for whatever reason, everyone was pants on head retarded and couldn't think of what he said before that.
See, but here's the thing about that too, is I don't think, like, I think both of us find that fairly obvious to a degree, but like, you know, it's also not entirely obvious, I think, in their world, because don't forget, like, your magical ability still does affect the games, because these games can be everything. Like in the show, it's mostly board games and stuff, but don't forget, this can include absolutely everything. And the one who challenges doesn't get to choose the game. So the race will always choose games in their benefit. So magic still does have a little bit of an effect, like we saw with the last game, where the War Beasts chose a game that uses all of their physical strength to give them all the advantage compared to any other human, except for Sora and Shiro, because they are gods.
The thing is it's just, I don't know. I know it's a fantasy world and everything, but I have a very hard time believing that essentially a human species wouldn't evolve to the point where they have similar professions like we do in modern day life, even if it's going to be a primitive version of it. That's why I don't understand why there isn't more of like a lawyer type person that can find the loopholes necessary to create fair games. Because that's all they needed to do. If they wanted to keep winning, or at least get a chance of winning, they just needed to figure out the loophole to make more fair games for them, essentially nullifying magic out of game, which I think is possible even given those 10 pledges or whatever.
See, to me, it's more believable because I'm trying to think, like, how long ago was the Great War? Because I don't think it was actually that long before Sora and Shiro showed up, of when the Great War ended.
Well, I don't know. Even in such a short amount of time, you'd think that there'd be a lot of brilliant minds. At least I want to choose to believe that there would be brilliant minds still hidden within humanity, that they would start freaking out, being like, okay, what the heck? We are getting screwed right now. Because even if the war was just recently ended, you'd think that there would be progress being made to figure out, okay, what can we do? Which is what Sora was saying. Sora was saying, like, yeah, you guys need to realize that we do suck, but you know what? That's our strength. We need to figure out what the heck we can do while we suck. And that's why it's just weird that this never occurred to anyone else. Was everyone else just, I don't know, bashing their head against the wall? Oh, let's play a game. Let's see who can bash our head against the wall the most.
Oh god, yeah, the war is actually quite a bit longer than I thought. It was never mentioned in the show, but it was mentioned in one of the light novels that somebody figured out it was about 6,000 years or so since the end of the war. And
So
yeah, within that time, I could see maybe there'd be some great minds and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's why I'm just like, okay, so Sora and Shira are the catalyst of essentially getting people to start believing, but I don't know. It's a poor bit of writing to not have anybody start figuring out anything. Like the closest you get is the previous king, the one that everyone thought was a fool. Like that's the closest we're getting to a genius mind, and I refuse to believe that there's no one else that was able to think of something else. Because essentially, the Fool King was playing off the fact that he believed that there was going to be a genius mind following him to pick up on all the clues that he revealed by doing all this. So essentially, he wanted to play that fool just to be able to be like, okay, well, here's the puzzle pieces I figured out, guys. Solve it for me, please. Thanks. Okay, bye.
I mean, he was a genius in his own right because he was a lawyer type because he did find the loophole within the rules, where he found out that he can never tell the rule. He can never tell the game that this mysterious game that no other race could figure out.
When I'm talking about a loophole, I'm not necessarily meaning like in a specific game. I'm meaning in general. Like these people never went meta with this. They're just like, oh, we're screwed. I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to get drunk, sort of thing. Instead, it's just, I don't know. I'm surprised that there was just no buildup of almost a legal system built around that idea of those 10 pledges, that nobody decided to start doing that. Like, I wanted to see the Phoenix Wright of No Game, No Life.
I mean, we did technically have the Phoenix Wright in there. There was the reference. I mean, there was no Phoenix Wright, but there was the judge. But
Yeah.
but no, as an actual Phoenix Wright, no, I could definitely see that. But I mean, that's what our protagonists are. Is they are the ones to do all of this.
What, 6,000 years? Was it supposed to be?
Yeah,
where
something
there's the
like
10
that.
pledges in effect? If you had that long, it just baffles me that no one thought of anything. They're just like, yeah, we're dumb, we're weak, give up, roll over.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think a big problem there is we don't know the entire history of those 6,000 years. We only know within the last like 20 years or so. But I think that's like, who knows? Maybe they like my guess is they actually were doing really well right after it, because they were good at that point, because like they were good at that point. Like all of their strategies were good for this shift and stuff like that. They knew how to do this. But the problem was that after probably 1,000 years or so, the other races started to pick up on those strategies that were making them really good. Because I believe they actually mentioned that at one point, humanity ruled the entire nation or something like that. They actually owned the entire continent, but they were eventually beaten back to this point. So they were kind of like they've gone over the hurdle. So they probably had this kind of power for thousands of years, but then eventually they stopped having these great minds. And then on top of that, the other nations started picking up on their tricks and figuring out how to use the system for their benefit. And so they started beating back humanity, and eventually humanity started to crumble, because at the point that Sora and Shiro are coming in, it's a completely crumbling kingdom. They only have like one city left. They have no more infrastructure. All of humanity is stuck in this city now, where they have no infrastructure. They can't get food. They can't do anything
Well, if they
that
can't get food, people will get a lot more desperate than what
yeah,
they were. They seemed really calm if they had no access to any resources.
they said that they don't have access to resources, and I think that was a fault of the show, is it didn't show the desperate need of the civilization. They showed it in some aspects, but they did mention at one point that the kingdom didn't even have enough flour to like produce product to produce food properly. And the only reason they could get anything nice was because they were in the castle, and everyone else was essentially starving to death at that point.
Which they never really showed anywhere whatsoever.
Yeah,
which is another flaw.
Yeah, I think they didn't show that well enough.
Because considering if that was the state of the kingdom, as soon as they bet the race piece, they would be dead.
Pretty much. I mean, well, that's what happens when you bet a race piece, though, is you're essentially dead. That, like they described in the show, is you are essentially giving up your free will.
No. There would be a lot more people trying to intervene after that. They wouldn't just be sitting out there screaming, "You guys suck. Grr, I'm angry." No. They would be like barring them from leaving.
That's probably one of the biggest downsides, is the actual kingdoms around them. But for me, that doesn't matter as much, the world around them, because it's about the games that Sora and Shiro play. That's what this is about, really.
Yeah, and I agree. The games that Sora and Shiro play are really well done. It's just once you start taking a look at everything around it, you're just like, okay, well, how is this story even happening? It's just going to be inserted because, well, this is the anime. Of course, it has to happen. But I don't know. The world building was a little bit lackluster, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and actually looking in the world building from the books, like, because I've done a lot of looking into this kind of stuff and the history of the world and the Great War and stuff like that were developed in the books. It's there is a lot more. Like they never they mentioned how many races in the entire thing. There's like 14 exceed, and then they mentioned like 4, and you saw like 2.
Yeah.
So it's like
completely retconned in the final scene.
Yeah, they retconned in the second race, the second most powerful race, the Old Deus. No, sorry, they're technically the first most powerful. Yeah, Old Deus is the number 1. Phantasma is number 2. Yeah, they don't. Oh no, they had elves too. Sorry, I forgot about the elves.
Sort of.
Yeah, well, we saw the elves and the Flugel. I mean, they were supporting characters, the Flugel and the elves. And I mean, they were pretty important characters in their own realms. I mean, the elf was like one of the nobility. She was like close up to the council of elves, essentially. And the Flugel used to be on the council, used to be on their council. So it's like, yeah, they were both pretty important in their own races, which is just extremely lucky for Sora and Shiro, but who cares? It makes an interesting plot. But like on top of that, there was actually a whole other race that they were supposed to go up against in that time, I believe within the first 3 books, which was essentially the mermaid race.
Yeah.
Which are actually below werebeasts. They're the one between werebeasts and humans, which is interesting. Honestly, I kind of think the mermaids would be more powerful. Let's see here. So no, one thing I wanted to bring up again was so you started talking about the 10 pledges and doing loopholes and stuff like that. I'm curious to see if you can actually spot the interesting fact about the 10 pledges. I wonder if you ever spotted that.
I don't know. The only thing I can catch is pledge 10.
Yeah, so that's the one that's always a little bit weird. So I'm curious, what do you think's wrong with pledge 10?
You can essentially nullify any game you want by saying you didn't have fun. You could refuse a game just because you're like, well, I'm not going to have fun. We all have to fun and play together. I'm not having fun.
But it doesn't say that you have to have fun. That's the thing with it, though, for me, is like, it says, let's all have fun and play together. But it doesn't say you must have fun and play together. No, it's a suggesting that they want to have fun and play together. And the thing that they talked about in the show is that it allows you to go up against... The idea is that you want to go up against Tet and all the races work together. That's what it's trying to insinuate. But there's a more interesting thing that I noticed after my first time watching it and looking over the pledges again. I noticed something very key, and it's talked about slightly in the community, but it's not really brought up that much, at least that I saw. The actual key thing is number 10 and number 9 combined together. In the name of God. So the ninth pledge is that in the name of God, the previous rules may never be changed. But then there's another rule, which is number 10. Let's all have fun and play together. Now, the thing I realized with this is number 9 doesn't state number 10. It only states that the previous pledges cannot be changed. That doesn't include number 10.
Yeah.
Number 10 can actually be changed by using the pledges, which I thought is really interesting. Tet actually left a loophole in his 10 pledges so that anyone could change
goal, isn't it? At that point.
Well, the ultimate goal in the show, from what they've said, is to go up against Tet, but I do have to wonder how they're planning to use that at some point, because there's no doubt that that was planned, that the 10th pledge can be manipulated. But, you know, it also makes sense that that one's the one that can be manipulated because it's the most weird rule. Because they even say it in the show that why is there a rule that doesn't have to actually be true? Speaking of future endeavors, they're going to bring in season 2. That's something that's actually been confirmed to be happening. I mean, it can be still canceled at some point. Yeah. I don't know what the progress is because there's just no word about it. It's all secret, hush, hush, all that kind of stuff at this point. Who knows? Maybe it's already been canceled. They are bringing in a season 2, and I am wondering what they're going to do with it, because if you don't know, if you haven't read the books, the last scene in the entire show skips half the books. Like they decided, like at the time of the show, they actually put the ending to the latest book that they had into the show for some reason. And they just decided, let's do this.
They're just going to wake up from VR.
Yeah, no, that's kind of my hope, is that they're just going to go, that scene didn't happen. We're retconning that we only put that scene in because we wanted to generate hype for the books. Which is what they did. They honestly just did it for that. I feel like it's kind of a pointless scene. It shouldn't be in there at all.
No, I felt that scene really diminished my overall rating for the anime.
Yeah.
Just because I think an ending to an anime is very important, and that was very heavy-handed. Even if you knew nothing about the books, that was very heavy-handed.
Yeah, that was honestly the way I look at it is that scene never happened. I just imagine the show as if that scene never happened.
Yeah, I just imagine it essentially ending after the coin toss.
Yeah, the coin toss, definitely. And I think that's a very fitting ending, honestly. Yeah, I think that
would be good.
I think that's an extremely fitting ending, because you go from this amazing battle to it's a coin toss. And even there, it adds a little bit of levity. Even there, it adds a little bit of humor and stuff, even though the Shrine Maiden goes into her true form and just like does this huge thing, and it's like, oh well, it's gonna flip around 37 more times and all this kind of stuff, and she determines it that way. And then they pull out the little they pull out the tile so that the coin just falls in between and lands on its side. Like that I think is really great. And it also shows how great they are, like just how smart they are with this. Just it shows I think it helps shows the brilliance of Sora and Shiro.
It also kind of plays on the stupidity of the Werebeast. Well, that they over relied on that and they could not see past that. They thought they were essentially good with just that ability, and they just decided not to be smart.
Yeah, it's that it's also showcasing the fact of the ingenuity of the humans versus everyone else relying on their magic too much. Yeah. Because essentially, like he said during the big speech, is they may use our tools, but they will never master them, because they learned how to use their magic to play the games in their favor and all that kind of stuff, like the humans would have had before. But then that just means they need to play the extra mile. They need to play one more extra mile and outsmart the magic, because they know what they're going to rely, because at this point they're going to rely on their magic no matter what. But they also use the ingenuity of the humans of the past, but it's not enough for the ingenuity of the humans that progress further.
Now the bigger question is, what are we going to do next? What's our next anime?
Oh, I have no idea what we're going to do for our next anime. But there's another thing I wanted to ask about, actually, that might be a flaw. What did you think of the humor of the show?
In general, it's just your standard humor.
Mm-hmm.
Standard segue humor.
Like, so, well, the things about the show is that it had a lot of referential humor, which is good because it was actually good referential humor for the most part. It wasn't extremely distracting, and they played it in with the plot at times, and it was more of just like a quick little offshoot. Usually, like the fact that they had the Laputa Castle in the Sky reference, I thought that was like just a really cute little thing, and it provided a little bit of comedy. But even if you don't kind of understand it, it's brushed by really quickly, and it doesn't get in the way. There's a lot of background references too, but there was like the whole Phoenix Wright thing that we talked about, and that they play it doesn't get in the way of the story at all. That one, like if you actually look at his phone, I noticed this time. I didn't notice it the other times, but if you look at his phone, he's actually playing the soundtrack off his phone, and that's where the music's coming from. No, I love the references and all that kind of stuff. I feel like they use the references wisely. They didn't shove it in your face, and it didn't take away from the plot at all, and it was spaced out enough, and when it did show up, it was usually quite impactful and funny in my opinion. Beyond that, a lot of it was really over the top humor, which is something that's typical of anime, as they do like just over the top reactions and stuff like that. The biggest thing I can think of is with the gambling scene, the very first poker scene, where they play one-handed poker. That one was, they just did it way over the top. It was especially that showed up a lot more early on than later on. I found they kind of toned down the over the topness as you went. Well, they toned down the over the topness, and then I'm just remembering the finale of the game with Jibril. Sorry, I'm the dunce. I forget everything. But no, the game with Jibril. I'm just remembering the end of that, and it's like, okay, well. Yeah, I found that I find over the top humor is okay, but it's like it has to be done right, and I felt like half the time they did it right and half the time they did it wrong. Though overall, I found I was laughing way more than I would in most other animes. Even a lot of comedy animes, I was laughing more in No Game No Life than I would in like actual flat out comedy animes. I guess this is technically a comedy anime. So another thing that I wanted to bring up now that I think about it is just a quick little one. What was your favorite game out of all the games they played?
Jeez, I don't know. I want to cop out and say it's the coin toss at the very end. As the major games, I'd say probably the Magic chess game with Stephanie Dora Explorer. That one was just funny and absurd. It's a good showcase into what the world is like.
Yeah, it was definitely a good place to start. For me, it's specifically the one with Jibril. That's my favorite one. I mean, the big reason behind that is I think it really showcases how their minds work and how they use a lot of different strategies to deal with things. And again, that one, they also bring in the idea of psychological warfare. With Jibril, it wasn't discussed that much in that one. Like Jibril does a whole kind of explanation, which I kind of feel meh about. Like whenever they have to explain what happened, it gets kind of annoying. I felt like they did an okayest job dealing with that, though, covering the more complicated stuff really quickly, but then not like hammering it in, oh my god, and all this kind of stuff. Oh my god, this happened and all that. But just the idea of the psychological warfare with all the early game stuff that they did, where they had all those really ridiculous scenes, because it put Jibril into a relaxed state and thinking that she was just dealing with an idiot, a perverted idiot that just like, oh well, we're gonna have these really silly beach scene. But I also think it's good that it showcases that they don't just, like for them, it's not like we know they're gonna always win just because that's the way it works, but in reality they're not going off of like we've automatically figured everything out and we're always knowing what we're going to do, because at the end there they decide that they were going to like after the game they even said that Jibril even says that, oh well, you had no idea that I would use that word, but because they know, but it shows that they know psychology. Again, it shows that they know psychology and statistics and that they can manipulate people to the way they want, but it's still putting themselves at a risk. And it shows that and a lot of times they don't know what they're doing. They just kind of go with the flow, because you have to. You can't just, you can't plan everything. You can never plan everything, and you need to be prepared for anything that can happen. But overall, overall, I think this was good. I think we've managed to cover about all the major topics. There's definitely a lot more to say about No Game No Life, as there is with everything. You can go into hours on analysis. So what do you think we are going to do next? Oh yeah, we never talked about the Monogatari series.
Series, we haven't watched it.
Well, the movies, but
the movies is hard to discuss without watching the series. That's the thing. That's why it's probably not going to happen. There's so much that ties into the rest of it, and it's like, I don't know.
I'd kind of like to do it because there is a lot of things that I want to talk about.